and campaign report.
Into the final round of the campaign, and the speeches of the party leaders take on a new urgency. John Major, back at Westminster after a whirlwind tour of the UK, says the people have 72 hours to save the Union. Tony Blair warns his supporters to battle for every vote, take nothing for granted. And Zaire's missing refugees begin to emerge, telling of the horrors that forced them to flee. Good evening. With the campaign clock ticking away, the party leaders have stepped up the pace. And despite the message of the opinion polls, they're claiming there's everything still to play for. John Major visited all 4 parts of the United Kingdom in a day, finishing back at Westminster with a warning that only the Conservatives would save the Union from Labour devolution and social policies from Europe. Tony Blair brushed off talk of a Labour landslide and urged his supporters to battle for every vote, or wake up on Friday with the same old Tories. Paddy Ashdown insisted again that only the Liberal Democrats could be trusted to improve the health service and education. Our political editor, Robin Oakley, reports.
After a day-long drive for votes nationwide, Mr Major turned away the tolling of Big Ben's bell with a smile.
All general elections have their own special character and their own special dangers.
The special danger in this one, he insisted, dramatically posed with supporters outside Parliament, was that opposition policies would precipitate Scottish separation and a slide towards a federal Europe.
The message that I would give to the British nation is quite clear. You have 72 hours to save the Union. 72 hours to make sure that the nature of our government is not changed irrevocably.
But weren't opinion polls indicating that he was sliding towards a massive defeat?
Why do you think the poll gap has not closed, given that extra long campaign that you...
It's not the poll gap that matters, it's what's actually happening on the doorstep. And I don't believe the opinion polls. They bear no relationship whatsoever to what we're finding on the doorstep. People talk of undecideds. I think you might equally accurately talk of undeclareds. I suggest people remember the lesson of the last campaign. Remember how wrong the opinion polls were at that time.
Tony Blair, campaigning today in the Midlands, may feel that number 10 is close enough for him to reach out and touch.
No triumphalism.
He knows the political dangers of sounding cocky, and he's striking a careful note.
This isn't a landslide country, and we've got to work for every single bit of support from now on polling day. So over the next 3 days, we are not going to be letting up in any shape or form at all.
Labour, too, don't really believe the opinion polls and find such a huge lead unsettling. They're still throwing everything into the campaign, and Mr Blair has written to all his shadow cabinet, warning of the dangers of complacency.
Don't wake up on the 2nd of May to the same old Tories back again. Wake up on the 2nd of May to a new Labour government and new hope and new opportunity for Britain.
The Liberal Democrats sent the prospect of advance in this election. They greeted more converts from the Conservatives today, packing up their blue rosettes for return and appealing for more doubting Tories to join them.
Millions of people who voted Conservative at the last election who are now disenchanted, disappointed and depressed for the broken promises and the shabby sleaze of this government. May I say to them, please do not abstain. Make the difference. Vote Liberal Democrat on Thursday.
In this campaign, the opinion polls have scarcely moved. The parties don't know whether that's because most people made up their minds months ago or because a bored country has only just started paying attention. Either way, they're all stepping up their efforts now. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
John Major travelled more than 1,000 miles today on his trip to the 4 corners of the United Kingdom. His message that the Union would be safe only in Conservative hands. Mr Major began his day early this morning in Belfast, the first Prime Minister ever to visit the province during an election. From there it was on to Edinburgh to emphasise his party's stand against devolution. Next stop was Anglesey in North Wales before finally returning to London this evening. Our correspondent Jon Sopel has been following the Major campaign.
A dramatic way of showing John Major's commitment to the Union was what Central Office wanted.
A frantic tour of the four corners of the Union was what they decided upon, starting in Northern Ireland. This is territory normally considered out of bounds during an election, and amid exceptionally tight security, he went on as routine an election walkabout as is possible when surrounded by the RUC. It even took in a visit to a supermarket.
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to meet you. Mr.
Very
Major.
good to
Great
see you.
to
Good morning.
see you.
I often come to Northern Ireland. I like coming to Northern Ireland. I'm going to go on coming to Northern Ireland.
Aside from a defence of the United Kingdom, there was another point the Prime Minister wanted to make.
That those people who are standing on behalf of Sinn Féin have not renounced violence, and that a vote for Sinn Féin rather than the democratic parties in Northern Ireland would be a vote that endorses the terrorism, the violence, the murder and the mayhem that we've seen in Northern Ireland.
This is the first time in anyone's memory that a serving Prime Minister has come to Northern Ireland in the course of a general election campaign. Party sources say this isn't a normal campaigning stop, but 3 days out from an election, it's hard to see how this doesn't have a party political context.
The big picture is to stress that any other party would hasten the breakup of the UK. So the next stop was Edinburgh and an attack on Labour's devolution plans.
Do you want the United Kingdom broken up into bite-sized bits? If you don't, you cannot vote for any party in Scotland other than the Conservative Party.
This issue was, in John Major's view, the clincher at the last election, and Tory strategists hope in the final week to link the themes of Europe, devolution and the economy into one to revive their campaign. The next stop was the Menai Bridge in North Wales.
William, move the bridge.
Those with the Prime Minister want to Scotch talk of a campaigning crisis. One very senior source conceded that they weren't doing as well as they'd hoped in some of the key marginals, but he quickly added that he still thought the Tories would win. Jon Sopel, BBC News, with the major campaign.
Paddy Ashdown has also embarked on a tour of the country, aiming to visit more than 20 Liberal Democrat target seats in the final 3 days of the campaign. Tonight at a rally for party workers in Oxford, he appealed to undecided voters and disillusioned Tories to swing behind the Liberal Democrats. Our political correspondent Carolyn Quinn is with the Ashdown campaign.
Nice to see you. Thank you. Here you are. How are you? Good to see you.
It's time for Paddy Ashdown's final assault on target seats in the south and west. 21 brief visits to constituencies over 3 days, selling the party's key message about the need for education funding. However fleeting, Mr Ashdown's well aware that the leader's presence is known to bring out crucial voters.
That helicopter will take us anywhere we can in this country over the next few days to make sure that we never leave a voter or a town untouched if we can get to them to get that message through.
This will be Paddy Ashdown's virtual home for the next few days. The party say that he's travelled more miles than the other two leaders put together over the past 2 weeks. Tonight, Paddy Ashdown's helicopter brought him to Oxford for one of 3 rallies before Thursday. At this one, the crowd was so great that hundreds were locked outside, prompting an unscheduled, passionate speech in a side street.
With your help and with your vote, we shall make a bonfire of this government and at the same time light a beacon that will shine for this country right through into the next century.
Inside afterwards, focusing on what he terms the tidal wave of undecided voters, Mr Ashdown used the speech to urge them and despondent Tories to join him, as Emma Nicholson and Peter Thurnham had.
Come join our crusade and we can do something about it. To everyone in Britain, north to south, left to right, I say, come and join us. The Liberal Democrats are a party of conscience and reform, and we are determined to make this nation better. And if you do, you will give us the power to do exactly that.
Paddy Ashdown views this campaign as a crusade, but after losing ground at this stage in 1992, his greatest battle is ensuring that doesn't happen again. Carolyn Quinn, BBC News, with the Ashdown campaign.
And that's the news from the campaign trail for the moment. There'll be more later in the news, including an interview with Tony Blair, live here in the studio. But now the rest of the day's news. Britain, 9 o'clock news, the other Eurosceptics. Why these Danish holiday island patrols want to keep the Germans out. But first to the latest of our interviews with the party leaders, and tonight we're joined by the Labour leader Tony Blair. Can I put it to you, Tony Blair, that whoever wins on Thursday, it's a fourth victory for Margaret Thatcher. She said she'd buried socialism. You've completed that for her. You've left all the principal landmarks she created in place.
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all. What I think is sensible, however, is that the Labour Party wants to take the country forward, and it is New Labour. And we don't want battles over public versus private sector, bosses versus workers. Those are things of the past. But on the National Health Service, for example, the Conservatives have gone badly wrong. We will rebuild it. On our education system, we are failing large numbers of our children. We will extend educational opportunity on small businesses in the industrial base of the country. Across a whole range of issues, crime and law and order, we will be setting out new approaches that will tackle these problems. But you're quite right in saying we've got no intention of turning the clock back.
But privatisation, monetarism, union law, choice in education, obeisance to the middle classes. She was reported as saying there's nothing to fear from a Labour government under Tony Blair. Is that a compliment you will cherish?
Well, I certainly hope there is nothing to fear, and I know there's nothing to fear from the Labour government. And when people say the Labour Party's gone out and it's won new support from people in the so-called Middle England and all the rest of it, I'm delighted we put a Labour Party where people from all walks of life are joining it, are celebrating the fact that we've got a decent alternative to the Conservatives that can move this country forward, that will run the country on the basis of a country that is genuinely one nation. And I think that's an exciting and good thing in British politics. And the fact you've got successful business people coming out and supporting the Labour Party, great. But they want to live in a decent and compassionate society as well. They want something done about education, jobs for young people, crime, the health service.
Well, they do, but you're pledged to continue the Tory squeeze on public spending. What makes you think that in government, your party, with all its pent-up expectations, and tonight Gallup are predicting a 265 majority, what makes you think they won't simply rebel against that restraint that you plan to impose upon their ambitions?
Peter, first of all, on the polls, this is not a landslide country. It's not pollsters or pundits or commentators that will tell the British people how to vote. They'll make their own minds up on the issues on the night. And so all this talk about landslides, just forget it. We work and struggle for every single vote. But you asked me about the spending plans. Yes, we've had to be very tough on spending and on borrowing. Why? Because we are going to inherit a situation from Mr. Major where he put up taxes 22 times, but at the same time has doubled the national debt of the country. As a result of that, we of course have got to be tough on public spending. But there are different choices that we can make. Smaller class sizes for 5-, 6- and 7-year-olds by phasing out the subsidy to private schools. Cut an NHS waiting list by getting rid of the Conservative internal market, the windfall tax to lift 250,000 young people off benefit and into work. Lots of things we can do.
It doesn't answer the point about the rebellion you might face. They followed you so far, as you yourself have conceded, because they think you'll win, not because they endorse your adoption of Tory spending limits.
Says who, Peter? I mean, people have supported me as leader of the Labour Party because they recognise the values of the Labour Party, a fair deal for ordinary people, absolutely right. But we live in 1997, not 1947. And you say, will they support me or not? We put our draft manifesto to our party. We got 95% support. When I have reformed the Labour Party's relations with the trade unions, transformed the way that the Labour Party works, I've had enormous support in the Labour Party.
What support was that on the draft manifesto worth when you pull out of the bag a proactive privatisation policy, which didn't appear in the draft manifesto? No one voted for that. You made it up.
We didn't, as a matter of fact. What we did, however, is recognise that we will inherit certain expenditure plans from the Conservatives, and we have to work within them. I haven't been in power for 18 years. The Conservatives have. You cannot put 18 years right in 18 days or 18 weeks. Now, the Labour Party today is a strong and unified party. We will provide strong and unified leadership in government. That contrasts with the Conservative Party that is divided, weakly led, and fell apart even in the middle of an election campaign.
Mrs. Thatcher's toughest squeeze in her third term was a 1.1% increase in real terms in public spending. You're committed to 0.6%, half that over 2 years. And that level of constraint has never been achieved by any government. That adds up to tax increases.
No, the reason we have had to be so tough on public spending is because of the public finances that we will inherit. But that is precisely why, for example, with the windfall tax on the excess profits of the privatised utilities, we can fund the £3 billion programme for young people and the long-term unemployed to give them decent jobs and the chance of a skill or an apprenticeship. But you're quite right in saying we can make a fresh start in this country. But because of the difficulties we will inherit from the Conservatives, of course, we've got to make sure that we are prudent and responsible on public finance. That's why we'll bear down on inflation, in order to keep interest rates low, in order to give business the chance to invest. Now, all these things have to be done because it's in the national interest to do it.
Well, you've made a number of cast-iron pledges. You've said if they're not kept, you and your party would deserve to be finished. You've not left yourself any escape route for what Harold Macmillan fondly called events. There must be events that could force a rise in income tax, a postponement of plans for education and health, damaging strikes, international pressures. Anything could knock you off course.
Yes, but Peter, the reason why we have been so careful only to make promises that we can keep is because the trust of the British people in politics has been broken by what the Conservatives did at the last election. They promised a whole lot of things and then they failed to deliver them.
But you've
now,
got yourself...
the very reason why I have put forward what I've called a contract with the British people, a 10-point plan which covers every main aspect of policy, is to say, I'm not promising you the earth, I'm not promising you a revolution, but the specific things I do promise you, I can keep.
You say that, but you've got yourself into a position where failure to deliver will be seen not as being knocked off course, but as betrayal.
Well, good. Let people know that we have made these promises, let them keep us to them. But don't let the Conservatives get away with this myth that because they've broken all their promises, because they've been a government that has bred disillusion and despair, that every government must do this. Politics needn't be like this. Britain can be better, we can give better, stronger leadership. We can have better schools, better hospitals, if we have a different government with different values and priorities, and hold us to the pledges that we have made.
Nonetheless, if elected, you will be the least experienced Prime Minister since Ramsay MacDonald, leading a team with little or no experience of government. It has to be a huge gamble for the British people. You could all turn out to be quite accident-prone in those first months, if elected.
Well, Peter, I don't think anything could be more accident-prone than what we've had in the last few years. And if you see a Conservative Party that, after all, cannot even hold together in the 5 weeks of an election, think what utter chaos there would be if they were to be re-elected for another 5 years. Not just the damage to the health service and our schools and all the rest of it.
That's an argument for Buggins' turn.
It's not, actually, but the other argument is an argument for a one-party state. Yes, we haven't had the experience of the Conservatives of the last few years. Jolly good thing, too. But what we do have is strong leadership, a united party, and a clear sense of purpose and vision for Britain. And that is what Britain needs.
Tony Blair, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Labour leader, Tony Blair. And now, over to Anne Perkins at our Westminster campaign desk for her nightly election roundup.
Evening, Peter. With Mr Major in Scotland, the State of the Union's on the UK agenda again. The Scottish nationalist's most famous supporter, the film star Sean Connery, urged Scots in the party's last political broadcast to vote for a stake in their own future. But as our Scotland political editor Brian Taylor reports, the issue of a new future for Scotland hasn't been the only one in the campaign north of the border.
The Edinburgh leg of Mr Major's single-day tour of the United Kingdom's 4 component parts. Striving for support north of the border, the Scottish Tories are now fighting virtually a single-issue campaign, to convince Scots that Labour-style devolution would break the Union.
Labour's devolution policies threaten the whole of the United Kingdom, and for Scotland, of course, they threaten our prosperity, our jobs and our public services.
Out on the streets of Glasgow, Labour's George Robertson dismisses the Tory attack, but he tends to play down devolution, fearing it's an agenda vulnerable to the SNP and remote from the everyday concerns of voters like schools and jobs.
These are the issues on the street. We'll deal with devolution when the referendum comes later on, and that's why the Prime Minister finds himself so out of sorts with the people of Scotland today.
How do we make this country new?
Sean Connery's voice adds what Alex Salmond hopes will be extra appeal to the Scottish National Party's latest election broadcast. The Nationalists say the Tories are finished, but insist Labour won't squeeze the SNP in Scotland.
The Labour tactic in Scotland is trying to remove Scotland from the political debate. The SNP, with a platform of enterprise and compassion, articulating the views of mainstream Scotland, are much more powerful than a Labour Party, a new Labour Party, which has sold out to the views of Middle England.
The Liberal Democrats, who helped Labour to draft a detailed devolution scheme, urge a positive response to the Conservative attack.
I'm deeply disappointed that in yet another flying visit to Scotland, Mr Major comes to raise bogeymen and fears and has never once during this campaign shown any positive vision for Scotland.
Labour strategists insist their commitment to Home Rule hasn't waned. They simply wanted to offer as few targets as possible to the Tories and the SNP. But it's fast becoming the latest Scottish political paradox. Labour makes little of its devolution scheme, while the Scottish Tories now talk of little else. Brian Taylor, BBC News, Glasgow.
Two more newspapers have decided who they're supporting tonight. The Rupert Murdoch-owned Times has decided not to back any party. Instead, it urges readers to vote for Eurosceptic candidates. And the Financial Times, which supported Labour last time, has backed them again. At the same time, a Mori poll suggests that 90% of Tory candidates in winnable seats oppose a single currency, according to Paul Sykes, the businessman who's backing them. He wants the referendum party to stand aside for all Tory Eurosceptics. The Natural Law Party, which is contesting nearly 200 seats and offers voters a blueprint to create heaven on earth, unveiled its key to proper government today, yogic flying.
For the individual, it creates an experience of bubbling bliss, exhilaration, pure happiness and joy, and also peace and integration. After yogic flying, one's clearer, one has more energy, one's able to concentrate more. It lowers crime, sickness, accidents in the environment.
Labour's campaigning technology has been widely noted, but today, as the party launched into its last 3 days one more heave strategy, it showed that even if some commentators claim the entire Labour Party membership has been centrally programmed, the technology is still capable of independent action.
This morning, Labour linked up Gordon Brown in London and Tony Blair in Nottingham. When the Shadow Chancellor took a question about tax, Mr Blair relaxed.
Now that's £650 for every household in this country. That's £650 for every household in this country.
Thanks very much, guys.
Next test, find a local journalist.
I should ask one of the guys from...
Ian Higgins from the Australian newspaper.
Oh, I thought I was about to ask someone from the Nottingham Evening, something like that.
Just as well known, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And there was still scope for further confusion, with the last question about the health service.
Provider, you can't have it both ways, can you?
Eleanor, if you simply maintain...
That's it, is it?
Yeah, well...
Can I just, say a word of thanks to whoever put the posters up behind me?
And a footnote on the opinion polls, the Conservatives are ahead, according to one of their candidates, in a seat which on all past evidence is entirely unwinnable. He says, "We just reckon everyone who's out when we call is a Conservative." That's it from us. Back to you, Peter.
And Perkins. Whoever becomes Prime Minister will face within weeks European demands to speed up the pace of change. A special summit in Amsterdam will debate enlargement of the EU and greater cooperation on foreign policy, defence and employment. This is where the parties stand on these key issues. The Conservatives have opted out of the social chapter on working conditions and will continue to do so, and they're also against any extension of qualified majority voting, which would erode Britain's power of veto over EU decisions. Labour will sign up to the social chapter, and they will relax the British veto in certain areas, especially social policy. The Liberal Democrats are seen as more pro-European. They favour greater cooperation in foreign and security policy, and they say reform of the veto system is imperative, allowing wider application of majority voting. Our Europe correspondent David Shukman reports on Europe's future and the challenges facing any British government.
It's the end of a shift at Europe's deepest coal pit, where the miners work nearly a mile underground. This mine at Forbach in eastern France straddles the border with Germany. Many of the people in this frontier region speak a dialect which mixes French and German. The coal arriving here at the surface in France was actually dug out under the border. This part of Europe depends on cooperation. It was here in the early 50s that the foundations were laid for the European Union. This region, so often at the centre of war, became the centre of a new Europe, where nations would unify rather than fight, a dream as alive as ever.
Diese Hügel warf den Arbeitgebern vor,
Andreas Müller embodies that European vision. A German engineer in his 30s, he lives in Germany but commutes to France. This is the open Europe which many want Britain to agree to. Andreas Müller doesn't even slow down at the border.
Bonjour.
At work, he switches languages as easily as countries.
Salut, merci beaucoup.
And from his perspective, it can only be good if Europe becomes yet more united.
It's important for me because my colleagues and I, we do the same things, and there's no difference between French and German people.
The new factory complex where Andreas Müller works is a melting pot of the new Europe. Owned multinationally by Mercedes-Benz, the French government and others, this plant will be ready to produce cars this autumn. Its directors believe European integration can't come fast enough. As the heavy afternoon traffic crosses the Rhine between France and Germany, the two countries are keeping up their role as the motor of European Union, a process which deliberately tries to draw in other member states, including Britain. But out on the edge of Europe, here in Denmark, borders and sovereignty mean much more. The ferry arriving at this Danish island, Roma, is bringing holidaymakers from Germany. Because Denmark fears being lost in a Europe without frontiers, the visitors all have their documents checked. The Danes are famously sceptical. Many see Europe more in the British way. As the EU faces another round of change, both the Conservatives and Labour might seek Denmark's support in resisting the most ambitious plans pushed by France and Germany. On this island, Roma, even the presence of German tourists is controversial. Just behind the beach lie the reminders of a less welcome influx 50 years earlier. Now the struggle is over the island's summer houses, which Germans try to buy. Denmark insisted on a special addition to the Maastricht Treaty to stop this, but many say the opt-out is being eroded. Local people have even started patrols to watch for Germans who find loopholes in the law. This team forced the German owners of this house to sell it. These Danes want definite limits to European integration.
We were at war with Germany 50 years ago, and we feel that Germany is a very big neighbor, and they have a lot of money in Germany, and that it should be particularly Germans who could come and buy our summer houses. I think also doesn't go down very well in Denmark.
In the Danish capital, Copenhagen, there's a campaign now to turn back the European tide. In a corner of the university, an anti-EU group is mounting a serious challenge to the Danish government in the courts. Even as the next European treaty is being prepared, the claim is that the last agreement, Maastricht, undermined Danish sovereignty, and that the Danish people were lied to.
They have been betrayed because we are going to be swallowed up. You can't see any end of this process before the core of the national sovereignty has been swallowed up by the Union. We need constitutional limits.
Yet, despite all this, the government in Copenhagen wants a much closer Europe. The Danish position is that as the EU takes in new members, as it soon will, many more decisions should be taken by majority vote, so that fewer issues are held up by the national veto, a view which many countries want the next British government to agree to.
I think it is necessary to accept or enter into majority voting in more cases, and I see no harm in that. I think this is acceptable to my government. In the areas where we do have majority voting, it works all right. So we could extend that.
The Dutch city of Amsterdam will be the next battleground. A new European treaty is to be negotiated at a summit here in June. The Dutch are preparing already. They want this follow-on to the Maastricht Agreement to lead to much closer union. The demands for progress are unrelenting, as the next Prime Minister will find.
There's every sign that when it comes to the summit here in Amsterdam, a Labour government would be treated more gently. After all the tension recently with London Labour's willingness to sign the social chapter and to allow a little more majority voting, both rejected by the Tories, would be warmly welcomed. Yet when it comes to the really hard issues like border controls and the exercise of power, Labour say they'll be just as tough as the Tories. Only the Liberal Democrats, and in Scotland the SNP, offer a vision more closely in line with the rest of Europe.
The impression among diplomats is that at the summit and beyond, Labour wouldn't be that different to the Conservatives. So whichever major party forms the next government, the negotiations here will start yet another round of struggles over Europe's future. David Shukman, BBC News, Amsterdam.
David Shukman reporting, and you can find out more information on the party's policies on Europe in our election fact file on page 130 of CFAX after this bulletin. And the main news from the campaign trail again. The three main party leaders have intensified their campaigning in the run-up to Thursday's election. John Major has highlighted the future of the Union, saying it's safe only in Conservative hands. Paddy Ashdown has urged disaffected Tories to switch to the Liberal Democrats. And on tonight's 9 o'clock news, Tony Blair dismissed suggestions of a Labour landslide and urged his supporters to battle for every vote. And the BBC's political editor, Robin Oakley, joins me now. No one's conceding defeat or claiming victory, Robin, but what can you tell from the body language of the two main camps?
Well, you're just beginning to get that feeling in the Tory camp now of a slight depression. It's not exactly despair seeping into the woodwork yet, but there's a kind of bafflement. They cannot understand why they're getting such a different message from their own canvass returns and from the opinion polls. And there's a bit of scratchiness showing now about their advertising campaign. There have been disputes between the party chairman and Michael Heseltine and Lord Saatchi, the head of their advertising effort. But you know, for a party that's been as far behind in the polls as long as the Conservatives have, it's not surprising that there are a few tensions, and they're nothing like on the scale we've seen at some other past elections where they've actually been heading for victory.
And Labour trying hard not to appear triumphalist.
Well, indeed. I mean, the one thing they cannot afford to do is sound cocky. The Sheffield rally was always held in the last general election to have been a bad mistake for Labour when Neil Kinnock sounded too triumphant. Tony Blair is very, very careful not to sound triumphalist, and he doesn't want to suggest anywhere that there's really a chance of a landslide.
Very briefly, Robin, John Major's come with the Constitution today. Many believe he should keep banging on about the economy, stupid. Why has he taken that tack?
He's an instinctive politician. The Constitution worked for him at the last election. We all thought it was a very surprising choice for him to go on at the last election. It won them seats in Scotland and put Labour in a tizzy at the last election. He's gone for the Constitution because he felt it did well for him last time. He now feels instinctively the same about Europe this time as the one thing that can help to pull it out for him.
Robin Oakley, thank you. And that's all tonight. Newsnight is on BBC Two at the slightly later time of 10:35. But from the 9 o'clock news, good night.